Welcome back to Steady As She Goes, and thanks as always for listening. It's been another busy week around the coast, and a quick thank you to everyone who's been tuning in, sharing the podcast and spreading the maritime word. We've had some fantastic feedback on episode 8, The Long Watch Men, particularly around the story of the brave little ship Kerlogue. There's clearly still a huge amount of affection out there for that remarkable vessel and for the crews who served aboard her. We've also had some lovely comments about Niall Teague's song, and it was a real pleasure to have Niall on the podcast to give us another insight into the ship and its story, and to hear that dedication brought to life in song. If you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like, follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. It really helps more people find us. Over the last week, we've also continued with some big improvements at the Rosslare Harbour Maritime Heritage Centre, building on the work that's been happening behind the scenes, and we'll be unveiling lots of the improvements very soon. We've another busy episode lined up this week. We catch up with Captain John Reilly to talk Harbour Towage and a lifelong fascination with ocean-going liners. We look back at the Aaron-class lifeboat St Brendan and her nearly 20 years of service at Rosslare Harbour, plus our Maritime Words of the Week and news from around the coast. This is episode 9, Tugs, Tradition and Time at Sea. So we jump straight into some news from around the coast this week, and first up we're heading north to Malin Head in County Donegal. Not just Ireland's northernmost point, but one of the most important long-running ocean monitoring sites anywhere around our coast. Since 1958, sea surface temperature has been measured at Portmore Pier, creating what is now the longest continuous sea surface temperature time series maintained by the Marine Institute. This extraordinary data set gives scientists a rare, detailed window into how Ireland's coastal waters have changed over nearly 7 decades. Over that time, the way the data was collected has of course evolved. Early measurements beginning in 1958 were taken twice daily from a seawater well connected to the ocean, alongside observations from the nearby Met Éireann weather station. Then in the 1990s, this method shifted to daily bucket samples and handheld sensors taken directly from the pier. Then from late 2008 onwards, high precision electronic sensors were deployed, recording sea temperature every 30 minutes, day and night in all conditions. To make sense of this long and varied record, scientists split the data into two key products: a full resolution data set containing every single measurement ever taken, and a standardised daily time series designed to make long-term trends easier to identify and compare. Careful quality assurance ensures that no data is deleted. Instead, each reading is flagged to show how reliable it is. Once those daily averages are created, researchers were able to look clearly at long-term change. And what they found is quite striking. Sea surface temperatures at Malin Head have been warming at a rate of roughly 0.015 degrees Celsius every year. Now that may sound small, but over time, of course, it adds up. And it adds up to about 1 full degree of warming since measurements began. Faster, in fact, than the global ocean average, and enough to have real impacts on marine life, ecosystems and, of course, coastal conditions. The Malin Head record shows why long-term monitoring matters. Without consistent measurements taken year after year, these slow but significant changes would be easy to miss. Instead, the single pier on the edge of the Atlantic is helping scientists understand climate change, ocean and land-based, not just locally but across the wider North Atlantic region. Funded by the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, and supported over decades by Met Éireann, Donegal County Council and Marine Institute staff, the Malin Head Time Series stands as a quiet but powerful example of how sustained observation at sea can shape our understanding of the future. And while these measurements may begin as numbers on a chart, their meaning is felt far beyond the pier at Malin Head, shaping the waters that fishermen work, the seas that mariners navigate, and the coastal communities whose livelihoods and safety are bound to a changing ocean. So some very interesting stuff there from the Marine Institute as always, and of course they have a very well updated Facebook page and website if you want to dig a little bit deeper into that story. Now for a local remembrance event. The annual wreath laying ceremony will take place on Sunday the 22nd of February at 3 p.m, 1500 hours at the Rosslare Lifeboat Memorial on the Burrow in Rosslare Strand. The ceremony commemorates the bravery and sacrifice of lifeboat crews and coastal rescuers associated with Rosslare and the surrounding area. Members of the public are warmly invited to attend and pay their respects. Following the ceremony, refreshments will be available at St. Bridget's Parish Centre. So that's the annual wreath laying ceremony, Sunday, February 22nd at 1500 at the Rosslare Lifeboat Memorial on the Borough in Rosslare Strand. And the Lifeboat Memorial itself is a quiet but powerful reminder of the bravery of local lifeboat crews and coastal communities. The memorial commemorates the dramatic rescue of the crew of the Norwegian schooner Mexico, which you will have heard of in the previous episodes of Steady As She Goes. That was way back in February 1914 when the vessel was wrecked on the Kirrach Rocks during a violent storm. In appalling conditions, local volunteer lifeboat launched again and again into heavy seas, enduring hours of cold, exhaustion and danger to bring the stranded sailors to safety. The monument, erected in 1982 by a voluntary local committee, the memorial honours not just the famous rescue but the wider tradition of life-saving along the Wexford coast, recognising the courage, selflessness and seamanship of generations who were prepared to risk their own lives for others. Today, the Borough Lifeboat Memorial remains a focal point for remembrance, with annual services and, of course, wreath-laying ceremonies held to ensure that those acts of heroism carried out far from the headlines and recognition are never forgotten. The memorial is really, really beautiful, ladies and gentlemen. It's undergone some extensive renovation over the last number of years, and it is truly iconic down there on the Borough in Rosslare. So if you are available to pop down on Sunday the 22nd of February at 3 o'clock, you will be warmly welcomed, and it is a very fitting ceremony there in the remembrance of those lost at sea. Sticking with lifeboat news, and Larne RNLI is preparing to welcome a major new addition to the station this weekend with the arrival of its new Shannon class all-weather lifeboat. The lifeboat is due to arrive in Larne this Sunday the 15th of February at 13:58 hours, a time chosen to match the number that will appear on her hull. The new vessel will be officially named Machiko Nancy, with a formal naming ceremony and service of dedication planned for later this year. Costing £2.7 million sterling, the Shannon will replace Larne's long-serving Trent-class lifeboat, Dr. John McSparran, which has protected the waters off the Larne coast for the past 25 years. In preparation for the change, Larne RNLI's volunteer crew have been undergoing extensive training in recent months, making the transition from the Trent to the more advanced Shannon class. Several of those volunteers will take part in bringing the new lifeboat home to the station. The lifeboat has been largely funded by donor Michael Cameron through the Cameron Family Charitable Foundation and is named in memory of his wife, Machiko Nancy, one of the charity's founders. Machiko was born in Vancouver, Canada in 1954 of Japanese-Canadian heritage, and she married Michael in 1980, later moving to the West Midlands, where she built a successful career as a business manager and qualified accountant both in Canada and in the UK. After retiring in 2010, she devoted her time to gardening and dancing. She passed away in September 2020 following a short illness. And speaking about his wife, Michael Cameron said that Machiko lived by values rooted in her family's samurai heritage, including independence, determination, strength, reliability and professionalism, and that her lifelong commitment to helping others strongly reflects the RNLI's mission to save lives at sea. The arrival of Machiko Nancy marks a significant new chapter for Larne RNLI as the station continues its life-saving work along the Antrim coast. So another date for your diary there. This weekend, folks, the 15th of February at 13:58 hours, the new Larne lifeboat will arrive on station. Now for one of our feature stories of this week's podcast, and it is the story of St. Brendan, 17 years on watch at Rosslare Harbour. Now, when the St. Brendan arrived at Rosslare Harbour in the spring of 1984, she wasn't just a new lifeboat, she was a statement of intent. She was a 52-foot Arran-class lifeboat, operational number 1092, built for speed, endurance and the long offshore haul. And from the moment she took station, she would be tested, often far beyond the shelter of the harbour that she called home. She was brought to Rosslare from Poole in Dorset in early April 1984 by her first crew, led by coxswain Wilfie Stafford, second coxswain Seamus McCormack and mechanic Matt Wickham. With them and the crew were RNLI Divisional Inspector Tony Corse and District Engineer Robbie Robinson. South of the harbour, St Brendan was met by the station's outgoing lifeboat, the George Uri Scott, and escorted home to a warm and proud welcome. Before she was even officially placed on service, St Brendan was already earning her keep, and on the 25th of May 1984 she launched to the fishing vessel Duncairn. Her propeller fouled on the long bank. It was a straightforward tow, but it marked the beginning of a pattern. Call after call, day and night, fishing boats, yachts, medical evacuations. The Arran was fast, steady and forgiving, and Rosslare crews quickly learned how much they could rely on her. By the mid-1980s, St Brendan was a constant presence off the Wexford coast. She assisted yachts grounded up on the Blackwater bank, towed vessels disabled east and south of the harbour, and stood by fishing boats while injured crew were airlifted or extracted to the lifeboat itself. Many of these services never made the headlines, but they mattered just as much. Now, one defining night that would define her career in Rosslare came in 1988. In the early hours of the 12th of August of that year, St Brendan was launched at 02:35 hours under coxswain Seamus McCormack. The call was from the yacht Curida, disabled more than 50 miles offshore while on passage from Penzance in Cornwall to Dunmore East. Her mast was damaged, her engine had failed, and the weather was already brutal. By the time the St Brendan reached the area, the wind was blowing 8 to 9, seas were running up to 25 feet, and the yacht was found well off her reported position. A tow was established and then lost and then established again. Twice the tow rope parted in the heavy seas. Each time the crew re-rigged in conditions that left no margin for error. A Sea King helicopter arrived on scene but withdrew once it became clear that the yacht would have to be brought in by sea, and there was no chance for winching. For over 12 hours, St Brendan fought her way homeward, in winds never below 4.6 to 7. At 14:50 in the afternoon, she entered Rosslare Harbour with the Curida safely in tow. It was an exceptional service, not only because of the drama, but because it was so relentless. Well into the 1990s, St Brendan remained fully operational, and then on the 7th of July in the year 2000, she launched at 5:20 a.m. to the yacht Touche, more than 20 miles offshore in force 8 winds. Her sails were disabled, leaving the crew of 6 exposed in worsening conditions. Once again, St Brendan brought everybody safely home. After a refit over the winter of the year 2000, she returned to station in February 2001 and resumed service almost immediately. Gearbox issues later that year took her off station once more, but when she was available, she answered the call. Her final rescue came on the 25th of August 2001. The yacht Lucky Charm, with 4 people on board, was experiencing intermittent engine failure. Rosslare Coast Guard received the call at 8:50 in the morning, and the fast ferry Stena Lynx 3, which was operating at the time, stood by until St Brendan arrived on scene at around 9:30. Crew and equipment were transferred and a tow was secured, and at 12:25 both vessels arrived safely back in Rosslare Harbour. No one knew it at the time, but that would be the last time St Brendan would return from service. Just over 2 weeks later, on the 9th of September 2001, she lay at her berth when disaster struck. The Stena Line ferry Connigan Beatrix had a technical error when manoeuvring astern and ploughed into the lifeboat pen and the boat herself. Both the pen and the St Brendan were destroyed. It was the 3rd time, in fact, that a Rosslare lifeboat had been struck by a ferry, but this time it was fatal. Now, despite the damage, the St Brendan remained afloat, and the Rosslare crew and RNLI divisional staff worked throughout the day to make her seaworthy. She was escorted by Kilmore Quay lifeboat and left Rosslare at 1600, arriving at Kilmore just before 6 o'clock that evening under her own power for the final time. In just over 17 years on station, the St Brendan had completed 147 effective services and was credited with saving 28 lives. She was a fast boat, a tough lifeboat, but above all she was Rosslare's lifeboat, and for nearly 2 decades, when the call came, she answered. Remarkably, St Brendan lived on after her service with the RNLI and became a private dive charter boat called Irish Mist, and to the best of our knowledge, she's still afloat today. Her history here at Rosslare will never be forgotten, and she lives on in our memories here at the Rosslare Harbour Maritime Heritage Centre. a true hero of lifeboats and a true hero of ours here in Rosslare Harbour. Now, a very important part of Ireland's maritime story is the stretch of water to the east, the port of Liverpool, the River Mersey, and the Manchester Ship Canal. For generations and to this day, those maritime communities are gateways for us here in Ireland. In days gone by, they carried emigrants, mail, livestock, cargo back and forth across the Irish Sea and beyond. And for countless Irish seafarers, Liverpool and the Manchester Ship Canal were places where men signed on, joined ships, and set out on voyages that would take them across the world, starting careers, adventures, and sometimes entirely new lives. Our guest this week is Captain John Reilly, who grew up around the Manchester Ship Canal and the River Mersey, watching ships come and go, and who would himself go on to spend a lifetime at sea and develop a huge interest in what goes on today and, of course, in our maritime past. John, you're very welcome aboard Steady as She Goes, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, John, you are currently serving with Svitzer as a training master on the Tugs. So we'll start off at the very beginning, John, I suppose, and go back to where it all started for you from a maritime perspective.
Wow, so going right back, it's all as it quite often is, and I'm sure yourself and plenty of viewers understand that it's usually down to a family link, and for me it was no different. On my dad's side of the family, my dad's a tugman, has been all of his life. My grandfather before him, he worked as a fitter at the Manchester Ship Canal Company, so it was only natural really that I grew up in that environment. So my real first memories are my dad had a spell with Whittaker's on a big Dutch pusher tug. It was huge, designed for shifting coal around Europe, and Whittaker's had it on the Manchester Ship Canal. And well before, it makes me sound really old, the days of health and safety and being where it is now, quite often I go down with my mum, she'd take me and my sister, and we go aboard and see my dad. He was mate on there, and she used to do a run from Ince Power Station on the Manchester Ship Canal. She'd go up to Gladstone and Liverpool with ore emulsion barges, and just to be in the environment that, you know, when I grew up, all our books on the shelves were ships from around the world, and to be able to then stare at these pictures and then go and see my dad in that environment fascinated me. Next thing, we'd be going up and down the Manchester Ship Canal, and I'd be able to sit there with my hand on the tiller. Whether or not I was actually steering, I don't know. But it's just, you know, it gave the illusion of that. Probably not. I think there'd been a few MAIB reports for that age I'd have been doing it. But
what age were you at that point, John?
This would have been mid-90s, so 9, 10. I would have gone down and sort of, they used to take us down to Eastern Locks, where before security was what it is now, and we could sort of wave to him going past, but it was probably mid-90s by the time we actually went aboard and did a little bit there, sort of walking around with him, and just being in that environment. I think it's like anything else, once you get the smells and the sounds, you know, it sounds cliche, but you get bitten by the bug, and it was just a great environment to be in, and I loved it. You know, I'd go home then, and the first thing I'd do, I'd have my Lego out and trying to recreate what I'd just been on and seen and done. I just loved it, and it was obviously well before internet, what it is today. So it was a case of going looking at books and being interested, and I think there's a lot to be said for having the world at your fingertips now, but being able to sort of get snapshots in a book, it added to the mystique of what was out there and what you could do.
Absolutely, yeah.
So once
There wasn't a whole lot of 9 or 10-year-olds going around on ships even at that time, and there certainly isn't too many nowadays.
No, that's right. Yeah, I mean, I was lucky because I mean, from like I say, as a young age, I knew that was the way I was going. I can't even recall a definite time where I said, right, I'm going to sea. It was almost like it was taken for granted. And I knew by the time GCSEs and things came around that, you know, my dad had been saying to me, you need to go and get your tickets and that sort of thing, which to me, that was just part and parcel of it. And even that was young. I think about the 11 years of age, he took me over to the Swallow Hotel in Liverpool. So we're going right back now. And BP were doing a drive for cadets. So that would have been 97, 96, 97. well too young to be a cadet, just to go over there and see what it was all about. And I remember being given all these papers and photographs off BP of the ships and where they went and routes, and it was just, it all added to this mystique. So by that stage, then it was virtually written in stone that that's the way I was going to go.
Yeah, it's a natural progression for you in the environment you were in, and I suppose to get not to get too romantic about it, but like certainly for me, and I know you're the same, it's a way of life rather than a career choice. There was, like you said there was no big decision to be made here. It was a way of life, and it was just natural for you to carry on in that vein. Like, so it's, and I think people not in the industry probably don't get that as much as we do. And, when you get up in the morning, the first thing you think of what time is high water and what the weather is doing before
Yeah,
you even think what else is going on in the world, like.
100% agree with you. And I mean, all that way forward now on Tugs, I still believe Tugs is one of those places where you can still go and have that tradition, still have that sort of ownership of the vessel, and the tight sort of, again, cliche, but the tightness of a crew, a family atmosphere of a crew. And I mean, you know more than anyone the sort of weather that we're battling on a daily basis and all these things that get thrown to test you, and it just feels like all that what I've just spoken about was working its way up to this point now. So it does feel kind of natural in that respect, definitely.
Yeah, brilliant. Really interesting stuff. So then from there on, then I suppose you had to wait a little bit longer than 11 or 12, but you took up a cadetship. Was that with Bibby Lines then? Is that right?
Yeah, I was lucky. I was with Bibby, so I spent a couple of summers with some of my dad's old skippers on the Manchester Ship Canal tugs. Went with a few pilots. Again, well before health and safety, it was pick up the phone and yeah, we've got a job up to Stanlow this afternoon. Does a young lad want to come with us? And like, before I knew it, was walking across a dolphin and going up a pilot ladder. And I remember those things very well and the excitement that was, and walking onto the bridge of a ship with a pilot and seeing how it all went on. That was it for me then. So yeah, got me the GCSEs I needed. I held back a little bit with A levels just in case it wasn't going to work out or wherever. And then yeah, I got cadetship with Bibby, went to Fleetwood, and I was so lucky. I know a couple of your colleagues now, Matt Roberts being one of them. He was in my intake in Fleetwood, and well, I won't tell you some of the names he used to call me because a lot of them had sort of short sea runs, and I had this fantastic cadetship with Bibby, but it was on the last of the famous bankline vessels.
Yeah.
So it was west about round the world, passengers, general cargo, South Pacific, and it was just incredible. All those pictures of those books that I looked at as a lad growing up, it was just there. It was right in front of me.
And they were the absolute last of the last of the last type of that trade. I remember in college in Fleetwood as well. We had the drawings of bankline ships because it was the closest connection we could get to that type of vessel to be able to talk about them, study them, and see how they operated. But you were blessed really to have fallen into that. And maybe it wasn't luck, maybe it was written in the stars because you had been coming through, the system you'd come through at home and stuff like that. So you were probably destined to end up on something really interesting anyway.
Yeah, yeah, I'd like to think so. And to be honest with you, Sean, I think looking at the way the industry is now, and all the vessels that had been on aside from those, I don't think bored would have been the right term, but it wouldn't have been for the inspiration or whatever I'd seen as a youngster. But going on those ships, it really came off the page. And one minute you're loading fairground rides, and then this is all in one cargo. What you're doing fairground rides in the tween deck, and then you're going forward, and we're loading cocoa beans in the forward hatch. And I mean, for students doing stability and stuff to do with load lines and what you're carrying and where it's going and what order it's got to come in and out. It was mind-boggling.
Yeah,
You know,
I remember reading a book called Eight Bells and Top Masts. It was one of my inspirations to go to sea. And she was a tramper, and exactly what you're talking about, and here you are living that life, as a cadet. It must have been brilliant.
yeah, like you say, it probably didn't dawn on me as much as it probably should have then. But that all came to an end literally within 2 years of me doing it. They went for scrapping. And that was, like you say, that was the end of that generation. So yeah, it was almost like it held on long enough for me to get there and to just go and do what I wanted to do and see what I needed to see. And yeah, it's you know, no matter what happens in the future, those memories can never be taken away. And I was lucky to do it, really were.
Yeah, brilliant. And after you qualified then with your second mate's ticket or officer to watch, as it's known nowadays, how did you progress further on then up towards masters? Who were you with after that?
Well, this is where the maritime industry really sort of, I don't know, shows the pitfalls in it. I'd kind of I'd worked out from an early start that you need to specify in something. You need to find your niche, and just because of the way the world is at the moment, the chances of a young British officer qualifying and working his way up on a bulk carrier to master and sailor's master was just those opportunities were dying away. You can see now with some colleges, cadets are passing out with a second mate and struggling to find work. And when I qualified, it was 2009, and for those people that remember, then it was when the recession had just started.
Yeah.
So I went for an interview with Bibby again onto their offshore arm on the Bibby Sapphire. She was in Camel Airs at the time, having a refit on the Mersey. So I went over there and I had an interview, and I thought, this is great. I'm made. It was 5 weeks on, 5 weeks off, plenty of money, and it was based in Trinidad. And I thought, wow, I can't go wrong here. This is of it the good life. And a couple of weeks went by, I hadn't heard anything, and then it was, oh, look, John, we're making some cutbacks. The recession's taken hold, and we're putting a stop on the training and things like that. And I didn't panic, but I knew this sort of dream of being able to specify and become a specialist in something in the industry was something that I was going to have to do at some stage, and that where that would have been a perfect entry into that, I was stuck. Um, so then I had a phone call. As you do, you send your CVs off. I had a phone call from Ian Coombs's father. So Ian Coombs is, for those that don't know, is a colleague of Sean's. His father was an ex-tugman, and he was in the office in Milford Haven, and he basically said, "Do you want to come down and see what we're about?"
That was
Now
with Spitzers, of course, yeah.
that was restricted, so that wouldn't have been something I chose to do probably that early on. I always knew I went to sea to drive ships. I'd been on tugs, as I said, from an early age as a kid. So it was something that I wanted to go and revisit if the opportunity was to come up, but maybe not that early after just qualifying. But then, the size of the vessels there, for those people that don't know, they're not your average bog standard harbour tug. They needed the unlimited tickets on there, and I just thought, yeah, let's go. Let's see what it's about. So I
Yeah.
went down there, and it just reignited those things I'd done as a kid. And it was sort of, it wasn't taking a step back career wise. It was taking a step back to what made me fall in love with it all in the first place, which was great. And straight away, the old guys that were there at the time, they were, die in the wood sort of guys that were, they made a whole life of it. It wasn't just a career; it was a life for them ashore as well. And with my background, I understood it, and I got on well with all of them. I can't speak highly enough of them, and it's nice now when I still bump into them ashore. I owe them a lot, but I like to think at the same time as well, they liked having me on board. So yeah, I realised then, here we go. This is this niche. This is something I can specialise in, and this is something that I can sort of hang my hat on. And I've been lucky ever since then. Switzer have allowed me to go and do that. They've allowed me to go and explore my own pathways. Hence, now like you mentioned earlier, I do the training, a lot of simulator work. That shows they've got faith in me, and it shows that I've applied myself and got to where I want to be and made the career as I've wanted it. I could just say, well, it's a job, and I'll take the money. But if you're gonna be away from your family, I think it's something that you've got to be able to get out of bed for and have a passion for. And the fact that I have a crew that is like a family, I have a boat which I feel like it is one of my own children, if you like. It's just a way of life still, and to be able to go and have that, I've got no regrets at all. I'm really pleased that even in 2026 that can still be had.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm delighted you said there that, you owe the guys who've gone before you a lot. And I always feel that we are just minding this career, no matter what sector of the industry, and we're minding it, trying to make it a little bit better to hand on to the next group. And we all develop things, we learn things, we come up with, certain different new ideas on how to do things. But this crack has been going on for over 2,000 years, and we only know what we know because of those who've gone before us and who've done the same to keep it right for us. And a huge part of this podcast is recognition of that, and keeping those memories alive, because we only learn by those who've gone before. And it's great to be able to contribute to it and all, and push it forward another little bit. But we're kind of minding it for the next generation, aren't we?
100%. I mean, yeah, I always say we're custodians. We hold the job. Times change, as we both know, regulations and the tickets we have to do, and the time we spend going back to college and doing things. But let's face it, it doesn't matter if you're the first guy in a papyrus boat going across the Nile or doing what we do now. Those the fundamental elements haven't changed, and yeah, you have to have that sense of pride. I don't think I'll ever see it as a job. If I did, it'll be time to walk away. That's the time to hang your boots up. I think the first time I wore a uniform and stood up, on the bridge of a ship, knowing that I was there as part of the team and not just to look out the window. They're poignant moments, things that you remember. And you know, my dad's mother had passed by then, my grandma. But she was at the forefront of my mind on that day because she'd have been made up to see where I was. And these are the things that take you back. And people look at some of the footage you get from going out the West Channel on a stormy evening, and they go, "You won't catch me doing that."
Yeah.
Then, but that's where they have to realise is there's something other than payday that takes you back there every time.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. And for anyone who hasn't picked out the bones of what we're talking about there, lots of references. We John and I work together. I'm a pilot here in Milford Haven, and John is, as he said, a tug master and training master now with Switzer on the tugs, and they're big tugs. And I suppose it leads us nicely into that, John. And just for maybe a brief kind of explanation, for want of a better word, for some of our listeners about harbour towage, because it's something that I think people see tugs and they see ships and they know that they work together, but maybe don't have a great idea of what goes on. So tugs are an integral part of, let's say, a cargo port. Like ferries have all singing, all dancing, rudders, thrusters, very high powered vessels who can generally manage without tugs. But the more traditional type of ship, whether it be dry cargo, tankers that we operate here, tugs are an integral part of how to get the ship safely into the port and then safely alongside the berth. So, John, would you mind just giving us a bit of an overview of each of the different types of towage that you would be involved in, and of course, training your other guys on now?
Yeah. So as you've just said, we're based in Milford Haven, which I suppose it's good time as well for the podcast. 30 years ago, I think it is this month, was unfortunately the Sea Empress disaster, which I know a lot of your listeners will be aware of. But that, along with other things like the Exxon Valdez disaster, had really focused tanker operations and single hull tankers and the damage that could be done when things went wrong. As a result of it all, we get into the world of escort towage. So even though there's been tugs in Milford Haven for, well, going back to the 50s, the escort tug was born due to the disasters I've just related to. So our biggest responsibility, if you like, other than just the daily basis of what's called push pull alongside the ships, handling them off the berth, our biggest thing is the escort towage, where the pilot will go out, meet the vessel, 4 to 6 miles from the entrance of Milford. We'll go out with them, connect up out there. Where there's as an insurance, really help you with your steering, help you with your braking, get you in and anything up to sort of 3.5, 4 meter seas, get you in, and we're there. God forbid if we ended up with another Sea Empress unfolding, that we could go there and our presence would be enough to be able to change the scenario and get you back out to safe water. That is the biggest responsibility we do. After that, then we've got the usual, if you like, push pull once we get inside the harbour. So the pushing and pulling until we get you alongside. On top of that, we've got the bow to bow operations, which are another skill again. For those that don't know, it's imagine driving your car backwards down the M6 with an Arctic coming down in front of you. It's a little bit like that. Probably not as fast as that, to be fair, but it certainly focuses a mind at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Absolutely, yeah. So just to expand on that a small bit, the bow to bow operation, and there's quite a few videos online, and we'll share some photos on our socials as well. So, the tug literally comes bow to bow with the ship. How far off the bulbous bow would you generally be, John, when you're making fast?
Oh, well, put it this way, I can't see it from where I am, so that means it's not far from under me. So whatever the distance is between my conning position and the foredeck, we're talking probably less than 10 meters at times, yeah.
Yeah, and then on the LNG ships, oh, and the VLs as well, to be fair, the pilot or the bridge team also can't see the tug. So there's a lot of trust going on there. And um, the line then goes up to the ship and the tug backs away and literally goes astern all the way up ahead of the vessel and allows that extra piece of control then. And on the bigger ships in Milford Haven here, we're using 5 tugs on an LNG carrier, four on a VLCC. So the communication between yourselves, John, and ourselves as pilots and the masters is so important, and I think you'll agree, done very, very professionally, certainly in our sector here in this part of the world.
For sure, yeah. And it's probably something that most people don't recognise, but like you say, it's such an integral part of what goes on. Obviously we've both been to sea and seen pilot operations carried out in different countries, and some unfortunately do it better than others, shall we say? But yeah, we've got a great relationship with the two teams, and let's face it, when we're both tired and we're both out in all weathers, it does come down to those relationships to get us through sometimes. And I think as a port, we do it exceptionally well. Some of the courses that we do together have helped that. And where it used to be perhaps a familiar voice on the radio, now it's a lot more than that. And we speak regularly and socially as well, which is great. We're professional out there. We both know what needs to be done. But I think again, I spoke earlier about the older generation. There was obviously the older generation of pilots and how the tug skippers and pilots of the past have now retired. Now it's our generation, and I think we're just building those same bridges.
Absolutely. What would be the most challenging part of Harbour Towage, John, for you and that you see now? Obviously, you're seeing a lot of more people now recently because you're training and you're assessing people. So, what's the most challenging part of the job, from your opinion, from a tug master's opinion?
Well, I think it's a double-edged sword. The bottom line is always still going to be the safety of the vessel. So that comes down to the tug master's mental capacity. I think when we're working the hours we do and in the weathers that we do, because it is still very much a hands-on job, which to me is everything about the job. It's also the bit where you have to be 100% on your game, no matter how tired you are, no matter what's going on at home, no matter how fed up you are. At that moment in time, you still have to be that person that can treat each job in its own, compartmentalize it. Each ship's got its own challenges, and be able to sort of rise above no matter what the circumstances are. That is always going to be the main challenge. On top of that, now because of the size of the vessels we're talking about, like I said before, these aren't your average harbour tugs. We've got much of the same legislation that comes in on international trading vessels. Certainly, the last tug I was on, she was ticketed and flagged as that. So the amount of surveys and legal requirements we have to maintain now, that's increased year on year, which is, don't get me wrong, that's the industry. That's what keeps us safe. When we go through busy periods in the port, like obviously winter is, and it's an energy port, keeping on top of those things as well when you've got surveys and things can be quite a challenge because at the end of the day, we've got a four-man crew and we've all got our own department and we've all got to try and do our best to keep on top of it. So, yeah, it's pretty involved. They're the two major challenges, and if you get those two things right, the rest of it falls into place on its own.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I purposely asked that question in the way I did, just I kind of expected what the style the answer would be, but not once did you mention any particular part of pushing or pulling a ship because I know that that's the part you guys love. That's the part you're absolutely brilliant at, and it's actually the admin and the husbandry of the vessel is actually more of a challenge to us. We love driving ships, whether it's piloting or actually on the sticks of a tug, and it's all the other bits and pieces that we find more challenging. And I think that goes back to what you said at the beginning. That's the bit we really love. It's the hands-on stuff. Just a little touch on the type of tug then, John. So it's ASD tugs that you guys are operating there. Could you just tell the listeners a little bit about the makeup of the tug and how they work?
Yeah, an ASD tug stands for azimuth stern drive. You'll hear it if you watch anything American. You'll also hear it called Z drive. But basically, it's two thrusters at the back, so a propeller inside a nozzle, and they turn 360 degrees at the aft of the tug. There's different variations of it. Some only turn 180, but basically, it's designed to be one, most maneuverable, and two, it was a big step forward from an older style vessel where you would have towed over the stern in the past. And what that would have meant is that in certain angles, you've got a thing called girting, where there was a huge risk that if the angle between the tug and the ship became too great, the tug couldn't recover. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, tugs were turned over with it. So the biggest advantage of the ASD tug and why it comes in and you'll see them all over the UK now is because we can tow over the bow and the propulsion's astern of us. So the chances of getting round to those angles and causing the same amount of damage in incident are far, far reduced. Not only that, they're far more efficient, and the one that I'm on at the moment is just over 6,000 horsepower. So you've got 6,000 horsepower and two units that can be turned through 360 degrees. That's a lot of power for us to go sideways, backwards, make a stop, push, pull, whatever you might need, Sean. So
Yeah.
um, hopefully we can use what we've got to make the job go as smoothly as possible. And for those days when it isn't, to also try and pour some oil on the water.
Yeah,
No pun
absolutely.
intended.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, and they are really maneuverable vessels. I know Switzer are building some new ones as well, which we'll probably have on as a separate episode, maybe in the future when they come our way. But they are so maneuverable, so handy, for us to work with as well, and yeah, they really do make our lives an awful lot easier. You mentioned when we were talking pre-recording, John, that you had sailed with and trained under. I think you used the word tough old skippers. So have you got any little anecdotes or any little stories that even from your training as a cadet and all the way up through, is there anything from your own seagoing career before we move on to the kind of historical stuff that stands out? Any nice stories from what's gone before?
Yeah, I think it helps to have that before you because especially when you're younger, you grow up and you think, oh, I'm having a bad day or I'm tired. Then you soon start hearing some of the stories of what the other ones did. So first thing you can throw away is the working hours. That was one thing gone. Then you can throw away the no alcohol policy, which I'm sure some of them use as a coping mechanism to get them through the day. So you add that into the mix and a smaller crew, and all of a sudden you've got this boiling pot. And I mean, the Sea Empress was actually a good example that the ferry terminal over in Pembroke was sinking. They had a new tug on charter that they were trying out. They'd spent all day pumping the ferry terminal out, which is a floating pontoon, using the tug as the pump. And then all of a sudden, there's a VLCC up the beach, and they've got to go and try and save the day there. So yeah, things like that. There was days, stray cats on the deck, and they were trying to get them ashore without being scratched to death. I mean, some of the stupid stories that come out as well. Great ones. You know, I'd heard from some of the guys my dad sailed with and whatever, tying people's push bikes up and putting them up the mast so they couldn't get ashore, and bricking the skipper in his cab because it was a cabin door that went out onto the main deck, and getting bricks and bricking the skipper into his cabin, and all sorts of stuff like that. Yeah,
Yeah,
some
yeah,
stuff I'm sure I can't repeat in case certain people bump into people ashore. But yeah, there's some brilliant stories there. All down
absolutely.
to the environment and the family, and fantastic stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it makes the traditions and the history and the folklore what we can talk about nowadays, like all those great stories. And look at it's not all doom and gloom now for us either. We still have a bit of crack, and obviously there's a lot less room for it. But I think the relationship that you alluded to earlier between ourselves as pilots here in the Haven and with yourselves as Tug Masters, we can still sit down and have a bit of a crack, which is so important because if we turn into robots, well then it's no fun, and I don't think the job would be it'd be done right anyway, to be fair.
No, I quite agree. And as soon as you take those controls away, why would we be there? It's is for that. It's for the camaraderie. It's for the working together. And like you say, the laughs that we would have, we'd also sit down there and we talk about certain jobs we've done. And it's a good example was a little LPG tanker that broke down a few years ago outside. But she was about 11 miles offshore. Matt Roberts had gone out there. They put a pilot on board, and we'd been tasked to go out there and stand by basically and see what we could do with it. The weather was horrendous, absolutely horrendous. But in that moment, it did strike me as here we go. We've got something here where we're having to think outside the box. There is no procedure for this. What's going to be best? And you're looking at those basic seamanship skills, weather, the forecasting, what's our closest port of refuge, what equipment has the tug got, what equipment has the ship got. And there I was with Matt Roberts, who was a Phase One cadet with back in Fleetwood, and I'm sort of making up drawings of stuff, old school things that I knew of with what we had. Not normal towing, what we do on a daily basis, but sort of sketching out a picture of a bridle and sending that to Matt and saying, "Is this equipment that you've got on board that we might be able to do something with?" and that sort of thing. And they're the days that you go to sea for, not just the sort of humdrum normal days. So yeah, there's plenty of stories like that as well. That's even though in an industry that's so regulated now and has to be safe, and quite rightly should be safe, there's still those times where, again, cliche, you don't get 2 days the same.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, John, you come from a place, both physically and holistically, I suppose, that has a huge maritime heritage. But I think there's not too many of us now that work at sea or have worked at sea that don't fall into the history and the stories that we've just been talking about and where we've come from. But you have a particular interest in a particular part of the industry, and that's ocean-going liners. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like you say, due to where I grew up on the banks of the Manchester Ship Canal, just down the road from me now, there's the Ellesmere Port Maritime Museum, the Boat Museum, which is more focused towards the canal. But across the way from there, you've got the Maritime Museum in Liverpool. Uh, I don't think I need to say how historic a port that is. It always made me laugh that on one of the ships I was on as a cadet, the chief engineer was from Birmingham, and I used to think he couldn't get any further from the sea there. Whereas for me, it seemed natural as a kid. I'd go down, my dad showed me the QE2. Um, we go and see the QE2, and then we go down to what was known as Dock Road in Liverpool. You could go down there, could drive the length of that, and there'd be ships in from all over the world doing all sorts of cargo and things. And it was fascinating. Again, like I said earlier on, these pictures in the books would jump out, and there they were in front of me. So it was always something to me that was touchable. My friends at school couldn't go with their dad on a boat and go down the Mersey and see what was happening, but I could. And it was just I was lucky. The older I am now, I look back on it, and the lucky I think I've been, especially at the time it happened.
Absolutely.
So this history was very much touchable to me, and for the times where I was still in school or whatever, and I couldn't go and do that, the sort of the research around it and the interest in it, I had to find another way of doing that, and the only way of doing it was by reading, and the ocean liner side of things was just an obvious place to be. That was where you still had the days of as aesthetically pleasing looking ships and stuff. You could imagine being an officer on and being proud of it just because of the way it looked, let alone anything else. Those days have moved away a little bit now, I would say, but again, they've all got their own mystique and they've all got their own history, and it's such a fascinating subject to get into and read around.
Yeah, and the transatlantic run was one particular part of that that you're interested, and what goes hand in hand with that, of course, is the blue ribbon, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, these guys were the Concorde pilots, if you like, of the day. And as you said earlier, we're blessed now with the navigation tools that we have. It would be nothing for me and you to, you know, board a vessel this evening, set sail across the Atlantic, and it'd be another day in the office. But for those guys, as much as that was sort of the normal for them, there was a lot more challenges to it. And then when things like the blue ribbon came to the forefront, you can see now why it was such a prestigious thing. It's not spoken about now. People are trying to get the shortest time they can between two city pairs for a business meeting. Samuel Cunard said it best when his slogan was "Getting there is half the fun." It was the experience of the crossing, and it was the competition that came up around it. So many fantastic ships, the Normandy, the Queen Mary, the Queen Elizabeth. Before that, Aquitania, Mauretania, obviously the Olympic class with the Titanic. There's so many ships that were there, and not only were they there to get from point A to point B as quickly as possible, they also were there to do it in style, and it was such a wonderful era to have been able to have witnessed. I would have cut my arm off to have spent a day around Southampton docks back in the turn of the century, being able to go and see all that. It must have been absolutely fantastic. Plus, then there's the other side, the mystery of it. There's the Neronic was a big ship for the time, nothing by today's standards, but she was the biggest cargo ship in the world at the time. Set for sail from Liverpool, so again, it's this touchable history. She set for sail from Liverpool. She had to run Liverpool over to the States, and she was actually a cattle carrier. It was take cargo out and bring cattle back. And she left Liverpool, got west of Ireland, and nobody ever saw her again. She was only 6 months old. Two lifeboats were spotted in the weeks afterwards. And other than a couple of what was suspected to be hoax messaging bottles, she's never been heard of again. So it just shows that the dangers there, that even though these ships were cutting edge, the dangers were still there. And I just think it's a fantastic thing. If I ever win the multi-millions on the lottery, there's a list of ships I want to go and find in my Explorer yacht with my ROV. I just think this stuff's wonderful, and it's still there. Even things like the Titanic. If the Titanic had survived, she wouldn't be here now. She'd probably, she'd have been razor blades a long time ago. It might
Absolutely.
be 12,000 feet under the Atlantic, but she's still touchable. That history's still there. It's an industry where there's so much history, and as you know and I know, it's considering it spans the globe, it's such a small, close knit, tight industry. I think there's more that we can be doing as an island nation to be preserving that. I really do.
Absolutely, yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that's again a part of our kind of mission, our self kind of mission is to promote it all. And as the UK and Ireland being island nations, there isn't near enough emphasis put on it. Like the Neronic is a very interesting one, and when you mentioned it to me that we were going to have a chat about it today, I read up a little bit more on it. Way back in 1893 was when it happened. As I read, she was also built in Harlan and Wolff for White Star Line. She'd completed a couple of successful, I think it was a five or six crossings she'd done. Another little aside, I suppose. I think she had 60 crew or so, and there was 14 passengers on there as well. Having researched it yourself, John, and read into it a little bit, are you any clearer or closer to figuring out what may have happened, or what definitively did happen, because the messages in the bottles were quite strange, weren't they? There was four of them, I think.
Yeah, personally, it seems to me as though it was a ship in weather that was lost. I mean, I know that sounds a very basic thing around it, but they didn't have the things we had, the weather routing and the accuracy in the forecast. The conditions surrounding that is where the mystery is, I suppose. There's mentions of ice there. There's the time of year, obviously, in the North Atlantic, because it was in the February, I think. So personally, I think it was one of many ships that have been lost to the sea and weather. It could have been something like a cargo ship. It reminds me a lot in a more modern version of the Munchen. That was something that was a last ship that was lost. I think it was in the early 70s. She was caught in a storm. She was still pretty new herself. One Mayday, and that was it. Never heard of again. So it's a notorious part of the world. For me, with the Noronic, again, she was the biggest ship, cargo ship in the world at the time. Sounds awfully similar to a ship a few years later, where she was the biggest ship in the world, and God herself couldn't strike her down. And I think it was such an age where the biggest was always the best, and that each time something was bigger, it was became more untouchable. And probably the officers on board at the time probably thought, yeah, we're fine in this weather because we're on the biggest, latest thing. And as history's taught us since, that's not always the best place to be.
Absolutely, yeah. In your kind of research and interest in the liner sector, have you a favorite ship or a couple of ships that you really like for a particular reason, and that stands out as one of the ones, if you were around at the time, you'd like to have been on or like to have seen?
It sounds obvious to say the Titanic and the Olympic, but they was, in my opinion, aesthetics is something that's very individual. But I thought they were absolutely stunning. When Clive Palmer said he wanted to bring out Titanic 2 and launch out, which might still be a pipe dream, the first thing I wanted to know was where can I apply to be an officer on that, just to say I've sort of done it. For me personally, one that I've seen would have been the QE2, and I think the QE2 is an absolutely fantastic, beautiful ship. And to me, she was the last of the pretty ships, if you like, the ones that we see today, and you'll be pilot on at times if they come to Milford. You, you look at them and say, yeah, all right, they're there for the leisure industry and the cruise ships. They're not liners as such. So yeah, QE2 for me, the Olympic class. I also had a fondness for the Aquitania as well, which she'd steamed well over 1 million miles when she went to the breakers. There's a famous story of the master of the Mauritania when she went up to for breaking up to she went to the northeast of England for breaking, and the master who retired by then, who'd been on there most of his career, he was invited to go for the voyage up to the breakers yard, and he wouldn't go just because of the history he had with the ship and how he felt about it. So I think that sums it all up, and how wonderful these ships were. And yeah, it's definitely a time I would have liked to been alive, and to think that if I had my time again, I would have liked to have probably pushed and been able to go down that route on one of these ocean liners.
Yeah, sounds brilliant. Yeah, I completely relate with everything you're saying there. And I suppose for those that don't know, ocean liners weren't cruise ships, and I think Titanic and cruise ships kind of get conflated a little bit, and they don't really have that relationship. Ocean liners were a way of, transporting goods and people, whereas the cruise industry nowadays is purely for leisure, obviously. So they are two completely different sectors, but there was such pride in the way they built ships. There was such pride in the design of the ships, and you've described that there. Like, they're completely different than what we know today. And there's an awful lot of very, very clever naval architects and people who design the ships we have today for efficiency. But I can't see anything more efficient than a fine lined liner going across the Atlantic at God knows whatever speed under steam. And they were really efficient, and that's where the likes of the Blue Ribbon came out of, because they were able to go so fast.
Yeah, I mean, well, case in point was the one that annoyed me, if you like. So the last line, if you like, to hold the blue ribbon was the United States. Again, she was built. She had quite a specific, how can I say, design process to go through because she was wanted by the American Navy as well, potentially if there was going to be a conflict. But the wonderful thing about her is she was designed by a guy who enjoyed the process of being able to design an ocean liner. That was his thing. He enjoyed it. It wasn't his profession originally. He built her. She was built predominantly of aluminium, which is why she lasted so long. And the only thing that took the blue ribbon off her was some sort of small craft designed solely to basically a glorified jet ski to shoot across the Atlantic to break the blue ribbon. So to
Yeah,
take it from a liner like that with the history and everything that went with it to me it was, how can you give that the blue ribbon that had nothing to do with what the blue ribbon was there for? And sadly, even though the United States still exists, she's actually going for making it into an artificial reef. She's had the funnels taken off, and I think it's going to be something that happens towards the end of this year. She's going to be sunk, so at least she's there and she's still got a purpose. But again, if we were really caring about our maritime heritage, should that be happening to her, the last real blue ribbon
exactly.
holder? Probably not.
Yeah, yeah. You've kind of led us very nicely again into the next little piece I'd like to speak about. And you're passionate about maritime heritage and the preservation of it. We are obviously here in the Rosslare Harbour Maritime Heritage Centre and on the podcast. And so much of this stuff should be getting looked after by those in power, but it's always communities that seem to come up with the ideas, the funding, the passion to keep these things alive. And I know that the SS Daniel Adamson is the Steam Trust is something that you have an interest, and you were also saying a family link to. So would you like to just tell us a little bit about that, John?
Again, it's strange, sometimes the symmetry with some of these stories and how things become full circle. So going right back to as I talked about earlier, as a little nipper, going to these places with my dad, we used to go to the Ellesmere Port Boat Museum. And in there was the Daniel Adamson, or what was left of her. She was a little bit of a hulk at the time. And you could walk right up to her. Couldn't go aboard, but I remember vividly seeing plants growing out of a deck in between the timbers, and the paint was shabby. And as a young, impressionable kid who loved these ocean liners and the pictures in the books, this thing stood out for what was the wrong reasons, really. And then at the same time, my dad shaking his head, telling me what a shame it was because he'd worked on her as a kid, 15 years old, leaving school, and he showed me the brass letters on the hull, what he used to polish, and talked to me about what his role was on board and basically where he learned. So to see it, it was a piece of the family history, if you like, in that sense, and the fact that that again was something that I could go and touch, and even though it doesn't ring true at the time, now at 40 years old, it does. And you realise the significance of these things. So years went by and she languished there. And then a colleague of mine in Milford, strangely enough, a guy called Dan Cross, he was part of the society who bought it for £1. He was the chairman of the society. He was a Switzer skipper, or still is a Switzer skipper. And at the time, he organised a couple of the Liverpool tugs to come up Manchester Ship Canal, towed her out of Ellesmere Port Boat Museum, where they just didn't have the fun and they couldn't look after her the way that she needed to be. The society bought her for £1, and she's gone from strength to strength, and now she's offering tours under steam up and down the Manchester Ship Canal, the River Weaver, the River Mersey every summer. She's got a fantastic following, loads of volunteers, TV cameras have been all over her. I've been able to go up there and have a drive myself on the steam and chain link steering, using a proper telegraph, and it's fantastic. It just shows what can be done. Like you say, unfortunately, it's not usually governments; it's down to heritage groups and things like the lottery funding and what have you. Can't do enough. I mean, they've so instrumental in these things. but it's preserving this stuff for people to see. Where was someone of my age going to go and see a boat of some sort with a proper funnel and a steam engine? And
Yeah.
now it's tied up 2 miles from my front door. So I'm lucky like that. But it's about preserving these things for the generations.
Absolutely, and she's beautiful. Like, and just to kind of fill the listeners in a little bit more, she's a steam tug built in 1903, very appropriately in Cavaliers as well. So she's literally a local ship, true and true. She was built as the Ralph Brocklebank after a director of the London and North Western Railway, which owned the Shropshire Union Railways and Canals Company. But she was later renamed then. The Daniel Adamson, but she's beautiful. Like, the way she's been restored, and I can't wait to go and see her myself. She just looks so well, and there's a fantastic website. It's www.thedanny.co.uk, and we'll spread that on our socials as well. But she just looks so well, and the fact that so much care and time and passion have been put into her, not just to, restore her, to tie her up, or to put her up in a concrete plinth, or put her in concrete and never to move again. The fact that you can go and buy a ticket and go for a spin on this is fascinating. It really is. And there's some lovely photographs and bits and pieces on the website there, and it's a credit to everybody involved there, really.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, thankfully, things like a big thing in the UK and Ireland is preservation of things like steam locomotives. But most of that was just due to fortune over with Di Woodham, who managed to hold them in his scrapyard for as long as he did. Once they're scrapped, they're gone. And it's very much the same. Yeah, I understand you can't keep a ship. It's not the easiest thing to be able to look after, but we are lucky. Something of the size of the Daniel Adamson up to, say, the Royal Yacht Britannia. These things are still there. And one thing that we do well on our shores, and Europe in general, you go over to Germany, there's the Cap San Diego. There's a few ships in Europe where you can still go there and experience this history. And the UK and Ireland, I think, is something that is so much of our history. It's something that we definitely should be doing more of.
Absolutely, John. John, it's been absolutely fascinating to talk to you here on Steady as She Goes. I think there's lots more to talk about in the future. I know we'll have bigger, more powerful, more maneuverable tugs coming to Milford Haven in the near future. I know you're going to take your maiden voyage across the Irish Sea by plane soon to Ireland. And I think at some time in the future, we'd really enjoy to have you, and I think you'd really enjoy a visit to our little museum here in Rosslare Harbour. So we'll put that in the on the things to do list, and you'd be most welcome. And I know that the other members of the group would really enjoy chatting to you, and I think you'd enjoy your time over with us. So for now, John, thanks so much for your time and the wonderful insight, not only into Harbour Towage but also into the maritime history in your part of the world, ocean liners, etc. Anything we've spoke about that has any connections on websites and bits and pieces, we'll obviously share them on the socials. But for now, John, thanks very much. Stay safe out there and steady as she goes.
Thank you. Cheers, Sean.
And my thanks once again to Captain John Reilly for joining us here on Steady as She Goes. John is a most accomplished and skilled ship handler, and I think you got a sense there of his passion for all things maritime, historical, and maritime heritage. And his story is like so many others in our trade, starting off looking at his dad and joining him, going up and down the waterways, and getting the bug from a very early age. And I think it's fascinating to hear stories like that. There's hundreds of them out there, and we aim to bring you more and more of them here on the podcast. So thanks again to John. Now we move to this week's Maritime Words of the Week, and we're looking at the phrase swinging the lead. And ironically, it was one of our own members, Brian Clare, which brought this one to my attention. And I'm not inferring that Brian is ever likely to swing the lead, but it was him who suggested this week's Maritime Words of the Week. Now, the expression comes directly from life at sea, back to the days before echo sounders and electronic depth finders. So when a vessel was approaching shallow water or entering harbour, Depth was measured using a lead weight, known as a lead line, attached to a rope marked at regular intervals. A sailor would lower or swing the lead over the ship and call the depth back to the bridge. It was an essential job for safe navigation, but compared to hauling lines, setting sails, or working cargo, it was relatively undemanding work. Now, over time, some crew were suspected of taking longer than necessary at the task or selecting the task itself, using it as a way to avoid heavier duties. And because of that, the phrase gradually took on its modern meaning. So today, someone is said to be swinging the lead, they're skiving, avoiding work, or making a show of being busy without really doing much at all. And like many maritime expressions, it's a reminder of how deeply the language of the sea has worked its way into everyday speech, long after the original tools and practices have faded from view. So there you go. Next time somebody is skiving off or not doing as much as they could do, maybe get onto them for swinging the lead. So that's about all we have time for this week. Thanks again to everyone for listening. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please do like, follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. It really helps. There's a huge amount going on all around Ireland's maritime coast, with some excellent pages and social media channels sharing news and stories every day. You've got Tides and Tales, the Marine Times, Wicklow Maritime, and all the various RNLI station pages, and of course our very own Rosslare Harbour Maritime Heritage Centre page. So do take a moment to like and follow those for the latest updates around the coast. Of course, if you'd rather have a face-to-face and enjoy our company, you're always welcome to do so down at the Rosslare Harbour Maritime Heritage Centre. We'll be here again on Saturday from 12 noon until 1600 hours, and admission is completely free of charge. You're very welcome to join us, and we'd love to see you. Until then, safe sailing and steady as she goes.